Now, it's got a familiar but depressing ring to it. A disputed presidential election in Nigeria, Africa's largest democracy, ending up in court. I mean, let's face it, we've seen that many times before. But this time, the opponents say they have the right of it, along with the solid backing of the Nigerian people. Two of the main opposition candidates, Atiku Abubakar of the PDP and Peter Obi of the Labour Party, have claimed the polls were rigged and that their parties will challenge the results in court. Well, earlier, 6 PDP state governments went to the Supreme Court to challenge the declaration of Bola Tinubu, the candidate of the APC, as president-elect. They argued that the declaration of Mr. Tinubu did not follow the Electoral Act and the Electoral Commission, INEC's own guidelines, particularly in relation to the uploading of results to the iRev portal through the use of the Beaver system. Well, we've now heard that they've discontinued the case at the Supreme Court, saying that it'll now be a matter for the Election Tribunal. So how might they prove their case in court, and what will INEC's defense be? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by Jibrin Samuel Okutepa, who's a senior advocate of Nigeria, who has written extensively and spoken volubly about Nigeria's election challenges, and by the lawyer Victor Odjemu, who has represented both the Electoral Commission, INEC, and political parties in Nigeria. Thank you very much indeed to both of you for coming in. And naturally, we have to start with the SAN, don't we? Let's try and set out the issues as clearly as we can before we discuss the legal aspects of how the case might be proven and what INEC's defense might be. First of all, how do you resolve such a knotty issue? Is the only way to go to court? Because we understand the APC has set up a reconciliation committee and is trying to reach out to the PDP and Labour.
Well, Charles, let me first of all thank you for dragging me here. I had.
Well, we're glad you agreed to be dragged.
Yes, and I told you why I'm here. I have respect, tremendous respect for my Lord, your father, and may he so rest in peace.
Amen.
Those are jurists of impeccable characters that have traverse the legal landscape of Nigeria like judicial colossals that they are. So very congratulations for coming from that erudite jurist of note. Having said that, well, you know that settlements or reconciliations or arbitration is encouraged. It has even traveled up to our criminal jurisprudence that you can reconcile. And if the parties can reconcile, the better for us. But in the process of reconciliation, there is what we call in those days Oputa panel, where truth must be told. And Nigerians are interested in the truth of the matter. How are you going to reconcile? Will you be healing wounds on an iron in your body? Will it not turn gangrous? So our political class, all of us Nigerians, some level of political maturity devoid of what appears to look like political rascality that has no respect whatsoever for the law of the land. And I think that any country where the rule of law is jettisoned for the rule of self-help or the rule of money bags or the rule of individual as against the set down rules and regulations that binds the conduct of that society will suffer serious crisis in the economy, in the security. Indeed, we will be heading towards what political scientists call the state of the nature, where the mighty become right, life becomes shortish, brutish, and nasty, and there will be no place for industry. And all of us, including the politicians, the legal juggernaut, the lawyers, the jurists, all of us will be going to what may appear to be hell on earth. So if they can come together and resolve it in a manner that the rule of law, due process will not have been abused and covered, and it will help us to move forward, I'm not going to be against it. But how will they be able to do it? It's like when a child is beaten, is crying, the father says he should not cry, he's received more beating. Will you stop a man who has been thoroughly beaten unjustly not to cry to the institutions that have been created by Section 6 subsection, Section 6 of our Constitution, to adjudicate matter, not to go there? And if they are going there, can you stop it? Yes, you can stop, but it has to be in a manner, to borrow the famous language of one Nigerian actor, Chief Jebediah, it must be opundential. We must know why they are going to now settle in total disregard to the Electoral Act, the INEC guidelines for elections that Nigerians clamor for all over, and we want transparency in our democratic process. So how are we now going to convince Nigerians that in the obvious, what appears to be obvious even to the blind, that that process that required transparency was rooted in what appears to be secrecy, only known to the institution that was charged with responsibility of independence, that should explain to Nigeria, will INEC be involved in such resolution? Because INEC is an institution that is being funded by the taxpayers' money, your money and my money. I pay tax, and I'm sure you pay, and my learned friend pays, and all of us pays. So will INEC also be invited to explain to Nigeria? Because you can see that since the conduct of that election, INEC has been very silent. Unlike before, I recall on the sometimes in November 2022, when the press were prodding and asking, will the results be as transparent as you have said? Don't bother. We are going to upload the result of the elections, and it's going to be Viva accreditations, unlike the manual accreditation before you go to voters register that created room for doctoring and cooking of results. We are going to do it, and it will be open from polling to polling unit. And as I speak with you, it appears to me that the election is still ongoing, because I have not seen all the results uploaded, but the winner had been announced. So we will wait and see how that resolution will be. I won't be against it.
Right. Well, that's a very interesting opening analysis there, and we thank you for that. Let me come to you, Victor Odjemu. I don't know how much of an inside track you have at INEC, having represented the Electoral Commission as a lawyer, but can you tell us why this election was beset with so many problems when they were trying to introduce technology that was supposed to make the system more transparent? Is it the lack of capacity in INEC staff? Is it a case of technology mismatch, where you have technology that simply wasn't suited to this particular context? Or in the worst case scenario, could it have been sabotage?
Yeah, thank you very much, Charles. I ally myself here with Learned Essien in recognizing your background, very distinguished. Let me go straight to your question. I must commend Nigerians for keeping faith with the promises of INEC that this time around they will implement the provisions of the Electoral Act as well as their own guidelines, which in any case, this current Electoral Act have made part of. In other words, the guidelines of INEC are now part of the Electoral Act. The Electoral Act says if an election can be annulled, or the declaration can be reviewed if there is lack of compliance with the provisions of the Electoral Act and the guidelines of INEC. So that's stipulated there categorically. So I can tell you that Nigerians kept faith because they trusted the transparency that the technology was going to provide. In other words, the BVAS technology. So they trooped out en masse. In fact, that faith could be detected from the registration outcome. How more Nigerians came out towards the dying days of the deadline for registration before the polls, voter registration, and there was a surge because they had faith that the technology will work this time around. Results will be uploaded directly in real time from the polling units into the INEC server, which will give room for transparency. The mischief trying to be cured there is the collation center issues that always come up, where results that happen in the polling units are never the same as computed eventually and at the collation centers. This was supposed to, and there were categorical statements where people were maybe rumors that, oh, maybe this thing will not even be utilized. The commission came out variously, both on TV, both in written press statements, assuring Nigerians that that was fake news, that nothing like that. Things are going to be uploaded in real time. But what did we see? So to further answer your question, even if the excuse being given now is probably glitches in technology, the question becomes, why should any of the candidates be a victim of that glitch?
Absolutely. That's a very good point.
So nobody should be a victim of that glitch. If there were glitches, then perform that process again while the glitches will not be there. Take away the glitches, do that process again, let it be the process as enshrined by law. Anything outside that will be an election that did not comply with the provisions of the Electoral Act and the INEC guidelines.
Yes, that's a very good point. And let me come to you, a senior advocate of Nigeria, Okutepa. Of course, in the case of Labour and the PDP, they are alleging that in addition to the incompetence of INEC staff and failure in some instances of the equipment, that there was manipulation. That's what they're alleging. How do you assess that as a provable case at the tribunal or at the Supreme Court?
Well, we are not on trial here, but let me say this. There are some very false assumptions in town that electronic transmission of results is not part of the Electoral Act. That, with respect to whoever holds that view, may be a misconception or lack of understanding of our laws, because under the Electoral Act, the provisions dealing with how you are to go to polling units, how to cast your vote, what needs to be done, and all of that are there. And then the National Assembly, in their wisdom, came out with the provisions in the Electoral Act that how result has to be collated, transmitted from polling unit to ward center are to be determined by the National Electoral Commission, INEC. Now, INEC is a constitutional creation. Section 153 of our Constitution, put together with Section 160 of the Constitution, creates INEC and gives INEC this authority to issue guidelines. And in various decisions of our courts, guidelines of INEC have been elevated to an instrument that has constitutional flavor. And I'm not too sure we have forgotten so soon that as early as sometimes in 2018 or 2019, in a state called Kogi somewhere here, the INEC rely on its manual for election to declare election that even if you had given all the votes of the person who were yet to vote to one of the political parties, the party who won the election before the unfortunate demise of Prince Abubakar Audu had already won the election. INEC declared that election inconclusive. And the sacrosanct of that INEC manual, upon which they rely, in contradistinction to the provisions of the Constitution that are set out how a governor could emerge in the state, was upheld by no less a court of the land, than the apex court of the land, the Supreme Court of Nigeria. So when anyone parades in the town to sell to Nigerians that there is no law for transmission of elections by electronic means, that person may well be has to go and get from INEC the INEC manual for election 2022, and particularly paragraph 38 thereof. So the people that have gone to court will present their case on so many fronts, and then their lordships will decide these cases on the law. And let me tell you that Nigerians, including the National Assembly, decided to shift our electoral processes from the 13th century analog recording to 21st century recording of technology. So, if that is the case, the question I ask is, if you have said that election at the polling unit will be uploaded immediately after the vote is counted, so that you will hold your own vote from EC8A, which is the polling unit result, then go to INEC server to now compare the result with your own, and in an unmutilated manner. And then you go to the server. On the 25th, the election was conducted. Up to and including now, I am not too sure that all the results of the polling unit in 176,000 polling units across the federation have been uploaded. When you ask about human factor, I have consistently maintained that the problem of Nigerian and the problem of Nigerian society is not absence of law. It's about Nigerian conduct and character. We can go and be staying in the mosque and in the church from 247. Nigerians of all shades of opinion are too far from God to be able to appreciate the magnitude of respect for law and order. Nigeria is the only country where we breach our laws with impunity, with excuses. Otherwise, in a reasonable society where law and order hold sway and where people are accountable, those who are responsible for the conduct of this election should either be by now in their villages resigning and apologizing to Nigeria, rather than sitting down to defend the indefensible. Because all of these excuses you are giving now and hoping to rely on so many provisions of arguments, because I have written on a series of occasions that our judiciary must avoid certain principles of law that put roadblocks on the road of justice. And part of those principles of law that put roadblocks on the way of justice is the question that if you go for election petition tribunal, whatever INEC had done is presumed to be regular. How do you presume regular what is obviously irregular? Even to the deaf and to the blind, they can see. So, and I'm happy that by the provisions of Section 137 or so of the Electoral Act, there is an introduction there that you don't need to call from here and there. If you can, by physical examination of electoral materials, show that there is non-compliance with our laws. So, how our their lordships at the Court of Appeal, at the Election Petition Tribunal, and the Supreme Court would determine these cases based on the outcry, just like they have come out today to give a decision based on the outcry of Nigeria, of the Naira swap policy. We expect that our judiciary should hold our political class accountable. And the only way it should be done is for them not to give any backing to the hooliganisms and political thuggery that have been associated with non-observance of the processes that have been set up. Because if we wasted our money to produce INEC manual, wasted our money to debate in the National Assembly, the 90 senators and about 400 and something House of Representative member debated that law clause by clause as representative of Nigerian people. Anybody, however highly placed, that breached that law in the process of our election should be held accountable by the judiciary.
Right, that's a very good point. And let me
come to conclude there.
Yeah, very briefly, so we can come to him.
When the foundation is destroyed, there's nothing the righteous can do. So the election at the polling unit is the pyramid upon which every other superstructure is built on. Once there is evidence of unrighteousness at the polling unit, then the doctrine of substantial compliance with the law should not arise. Because if a court does not have jurisdiction, no matter how perfect that decision is given, it's null and void. So that is the principle that I will be all thinking that our lordships should now begin to think in the modern day technology, not the 13th century's misbehavior and misdemeanor that we have just witnessed on 25th of February in the year 2023.
Well, let's hope they think in that modern way. But let me come to you, Victor.
They are modern Judas, so they will think around it.
Well, I hope so. But let's come to you, Victor Odjemu, because you yourself are also a lawyer. And INEC has, of course, denied any suggestion of manipulation, essentially saying that the system failed. But how much is the issue of whether the irregularities that have been alleged have impacted the actual outcome likely to be looked at by the courts? Because they tend to say, right, okay, we know there have been irregularities here, there's been a failure, this, that, and the other thing, but how much does that impact the actual outcome of the election? You see what I mean? And does it impact it in such a way as to alter it?
Yes, there are two things there. First, the technology, beavers, and the process that was supposed to be followed, which is direct real-time uploading. It has to do with compliance, because if, just like Lana Silk here said, once the foundation is destroyed, then there's nothing that can be built upon it. The foundation for credibility of the election was the transparency, which the beavers uploading of direct results entails. Now, it's either, because we know that the beavers performed very well, so there was no problem with the beavers. What we are concerned about now was that that system was compromised at one point in time. In other words, in real time on that day, beavers was used to accredit voters. There's not been any complaints about whether, apart from places where beavers may have been bypassed, because there have been those issues and videos and audios of where beavers was bypassed, which is the same thing with compromising the system. But the technology itself was up and running, so there was no problem with the technology itself. I think what the courts are going to deal with is the issue of the compromise of the system. And in my humble view, all they need to do, the polling unit's data is there in the beavers. All they need to do, and the agents also have their polling unit results. If the court looks at those documents which will be presented, the winner will emerge. And from evidence is already available, whatever happened at collation centers, at the ward collation levels, and at the local government collation levels, at the state collation levels. Otherwise, the technology itself was robust, it did the job, but at a point in time, it was compromised. How do you explain, for instance, a situation where same day, same accreditation, same polling booth, same beavers technology, but you could upload the results of the National Assembly elections, but you could not upload those of the presidential election using the same equipment, same day, real time. So, for me, compromise is indicated.
Right, as you said, Mr. Okutepa, the key thing really is how, I mean, you have to prove all this in a court of law. And it's much easier making an allegation, much more difficult to prove an allegation, especially in a context where the rules of law will be applied to determine whether the election should be nullified or not.
Charles, the reason why we are witnessing this kind of what appears to be political brigadries and political hooliganism and a total disregard for law and order is the ability of the legal profession and the Judas to approve an otherwise iniquitous conduct on the basis of presumption of regularity. we must interrogate what they call presumption of regularity. In a normal climate where we have institutions that are independent, the law presumes that every official act is regular because everyone entrusted with responsibility of state functions like INEC will be independent in name. So, if you listen to what Stalin said, even as far back as in those days, he said those who vote determine nothing, but those who count determine everything. So it was in a bid to stop those who count determine everything that the Nigerian parliament and Nigerian people advocated for technological development in which we use beaver. So let me say that the new electoral act had thrown in a new jurisprudence that will require their lordships, who are also Nigerians, who live in Nigeria and breathe Nigerian air and Nigerian tread on Nigerian soil and see Nigerian problem, to be more inclined to see issues from the perspective of what Nigerian can do rather than the presumption in favor of sanity in a climate where sanity is difficult to find. There is lack of total sanity, and everyone in the political field has this primitive understanding or primitive acquisition of power at all costs. And Nigeria is the only country where the wrongdoer would dare you to go to court. And somebody rightly said in an online something, that when an armed robber asks you to go to court, probably he may have some of his relations somewhere within the environment or where disputes are resolved. So I do not know why our wrongdoers in Nigeria will say they will do wrong and say go to court. And I want the judiciary to prove them wrong, that they are not rubber stamped.
Yes.
To rubber stamp their iniquitous conduct. Because if we continue to encourage this kind of conduct, shortly you will wake up, you may not find Nigeria. And let me conclude on this note that you remember in those days, impeachment was being done everywhere, including the brothel. It took the brevity and the progressive interpretation of Nigerian Supreme Court to nip the political rascality of impeachment in the bond, because they said, because in our constitution, if you look at our constitution very well, it says that once you are impeached, the court has no jurisdiction. It took the ingenuity of their lordship to say, look, before you can resort to the constitutional provisions of ousting of jurisdiction of the court, you must also show evidence that you have followed the constitution religiously. So when their lordship find, therefore, in the unfolding drama that they are going to be confronted with, that there was no righteousness in the journey to the promised land, then those who took the road to hell must be told to go back and start the journey again. Take them back to Egypt.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a very good point. But I do have to say that the case has not actually, I mean, it hasn't started at the tribunal. So obviously we have to wait to see what evidence will be submitted and all the rest of it before we then conclude that one side or the other is clearly wrong. But as a final word, because we've almost run out of time, it is now the case that they are going to court. I mean, they've said they're going to court, the opposition. But INEC has a new challenge, doesn't it? Because there is another nationwide election that's coming up in a week. That's the governorship ballot. And INEC has to convince Nigerians that the beaver system can be relied on and that people should come out and vote. What would you advise INEC to do in such a circumstance? I mean, should they test the equipment to prove that it works and will work for the next round of voting, or should they just come out and say that it's all change and that they're back to using the old manual system?
There's no provision for using the old manual system.
Yeah, that's obviously according to the guidelines and the Electoral Act.
Yeah, the electoral.
Right.
So there's no provision. So INEC cannot even draw a ring around that. That's out of the question. So they must comply, as it were, with the provisions of the Electoral Act and their own guidelines.
Well, we've seen that they don't comply. I mean,
So
they
that's
didn't
why
comply the last time for whatever reason.
That's what we said. That's why my position has always been
Yeah.
that if you don't comply, you cannot make somebody else the victim of your non-compliance. So you need to go back to that issue, because in the case of the presidential election, for instance, there's a salvation situation. The polling unit agents' results are available because that's the foundation of every election. Elections are conducted at the polling units. So all that needs to be done there is you get those things, you will know the winner. The winner is apparent in those results. So because the Beavers performed its functions, the results are there. The EC8As, which are the polling results sheets, are in the hands of the agents of the parties. So it's very easy. With regards to the upcoming elections, I urge Nigerians to go out en masse and vote, because part of the strategy could have been to create apathy, because you never know. Politicians have all these ways about them. They want to encourage a low turnout that will help achieve their aims and objectives. So to counter that, Nigerians ought to come out en masse and vote. The Beavers is working. All that happened was a deliberate attempt to compromise it. So they need to be watchful. Freedom is not gained on a platter. So they need to come out aggressively and vote,
Right,
and
okay.
push the system to its logical conclusion.
I have to give you the final word, because obviously you're the senior advocate of Nigeria here. To be fair to INEC, issues of electronic voting have been complained about in other jurisdictions such as Brazil and even the US. So the issue with INEC is more a case of how they've managed that risk and how they've tried to mitigate its impact on the legitimacy of the outcome of the election. And we've got about a minute.
My problem is, if INEC held itself out as having capacity to use electronic voting, and the march started, can the same INEC complain in the middle of the march that what he held itself out that it has capacity to do is no longer working? I have no problem with the workability of that system. I have problem with the man-made attitude of Nigerians. And so I join my learned friend. Not only that people should come out en masse to vote, people should go to the polling unit for this gubernatorial election prepared to defend their votes and stay there and insist that the polling unit agents or polling unit office, presiding officer follow the guidelines of INEC and they collect their results. All these mutilation, addition, subtractions that we are seeing on social media are anti-democratic principles. Once people go to vote, their votes must count. And I'm happy that our court have consistently held that polling unit result is fundamental. So forget about every other addition they have done. So INEC have not even told us that the Beaver is not working. They said there was a glitch and that their technicians are on it. Today is the 3rd of March. That election was conducted and the result announced while men were sleeping on the 1st of March. And so we woke up to hear that INEC has announced the result of the election when Nigerians were still complaining. And there is a provisions in the Electoral Act that gives INEC the opportunity of listening to Nigerians that what you have done is not to review and to do this and do that. So why INEC did not listen to that complaint? Okay. Maybe there was no complaint to them, or what we are seeing in the drama or just something that they maybe photoshopping, I don't know, but I saw some agents protesting when the results were being announced. But anything can happen. Maybe I was not seeing very well. But if
I think you were right, there were protests.
If there were, then it will amount to insensitivity on an institution that ought to be independent. To dismiss with a wave of hand. It's equivalent to a striker hacking down a defender in the penalty box, and the referee looked always like that. That is why you are likely to see the spectator coming into the field of match
Okay,
to
well,
grab the referee.
we're going to have to leave it
And may
there.
God not allow us to grab the referee.
Yeah, well,
which is the INEC.
I want to thank both of you very much indeed, bearing in mind, of course, that the Nigerian Supreme Court has never been known for judicial activism. But I don't want to start another conversation on that. I want to thank both of you very much indeed. Great contribution. Jibrin Samuel Okutepa is a senior advocate of Nigeria who's written extensively and spoken volubly about Nigeria's election challenges, and the lawyer Victor Odjemu, who has represented both the Electoral Commission, INEC, and political parties in Nigeria. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Charles.